We are back at the League-Kempner house and ready to rebuild that falling down garage. To recap Garage Folly Part 1, this is an old garage structure behind the house that was built around 1913 by J.C. League. He was an automobile enthusiast, and there was actually another large wooden garage in addition to this one on the property that you can see here on the Sanborn map from 1947. This garage had seen better days. The roof collapsed, the front wall was collapsing, and the back wall was at risk of collapsing. Your first thought might be, well, why not just tear it down? I don't think I explained very well in the first video, but this property has a historic easement on it and also some deed restrictions. Together, this means that the garage can't be demolished. It has to either be maintained in its present condition or be restored. Given the work that needs to be done in the main house, the cost of restoring this means that restoration was not an option at this point. I also shared with you how I stage my work. An outbuilding like this would normally be one of the last things I would work on, but in this case, the structural damage was so severe it was at risk of collapse and became a serious safety threat. So work on the garage got moved from not even being on the list to being on the very top of the list because of safety. By the end of the Garage Folly Part 1, the back wall had been torn down and partially rebuilt to the point where we needed to add new lintels. I had to wait a couple of weeks for the new lintels to be cut and galvanized, and I didn't want to lose my crew. Once they leave to take another job, I'm never sure when I'm going to get them back. And rules are meant to be broken, so I found another project they could work on. Unfortunately, it didn't need to be done for years and years. It was just to keep them busy. I used that waiting time to repoint the brick fence on the west side of the property. You can see how deteriorated it was. Plants and vines were growing out of it everywhere and doing more damage by the day. Whole bricks were loose and coming out. First, we had to get all the vegetative matter off of the fence. It was actually a lot. These two wheelbarrows are just from a small section of the fence. After that was done, the entire fence was pressure washed to remove loose mortar and any small remaining plant material, and just generally clean off the face of the bricks. They were a little slimy. Then the grinders came out. The old mortar was removed to a depth of about 1 inch to 1 1/4 inches to make space for the new mortar. The fence was then washed down with a garden hose to rinse out any loose debris and saturate the bricks with water before pointing. After final cleanup, the fence looks pretty good. It made me happy to have one small victory. It's not something I normally would have done, but I do feel good about having a visual improvement to look at. The garage opening was originally constructed with only 2 pieces of angle iron that had seriously deteriorated and contributed to the failure of this garage. I think you'll agree with me, the new steel galvanized lintels look so much better, and hopefully they'll last a long time. It took 3 of these big boys to cover the full width of the brick. Using antique bricks was really important to me personally. The bricks used in this garage are called Cedar Bayou bricks because they come from brick factories along Cedar Bayou in Houston at the north end of the ship channel. The area had an abundance of good clay, and after the bricks were made, they could be taken to Galveston by ship. So they were one of the primary sources of brick for the Galveston area back in the 1800s. These are called common bricks, meaning that they aren't very pretty because they were always meant to be covered over with plaster or something else and not be seen in the finished building. They're hard to come by today, but we got lucky in kind of a bittersweet way because just as we were trying to source the bricks, an old building in Galveston was being demolished. So we have a great match of period Cedar Bayou bricks to rebuild with. If you recall from Garage Folly Part 1, at some point this wall had been modified to add 2 windows in a position that was not appropriate structurally. I chose to go back with a single window centered over the larger opening. This is much better from a strength standpoint, and it keeps with the original Nicholas Clayton design for a garage on this property, even though that specific design was not used to build this garage. The first step was to secure the lintels to support columns with mortar, being very careful to get them level. Then it was just a matter of laying course after course of brick until the wall reached the original height. Building a wall is a pretty straightforward process, but there are a few basic principles to understand about laying brick. When working with brick, it's very important to use the correct mortar. Mortar is just sand and a binder mixed with water that hardens over time. Lime was probably the most common binder when this house was built. Portland cement mortar was developed in 1794 and gradually grew in acceptance until it became the predominant mortar by the early 1930s. Mortar has to be weaker than the brick. Softer mortar allows bricks to shift ever so slightly because there's always some movement in a structure. Since it's weaker, it serves as a sacrificial element, cracking before the brick can crack. This is a good thing because it's easier to repair cracks in mortar than to replace bricks. Repairing an old brick building with modern mortar can cause problems if done incorrectly. The first step is to choose the right binder. We're using type N, which is a mid-strength premix consisting of 1 part Portland cement and 1 part lime. It can also be made softer by increasing the amount of sand used. Depending on the work being done, instead of the usual 3-part sand, we use 4 or 5 parts, sometimes 6 parts or more. I know the restoration purists out there are going to criticize this choice, but there are a lot of factors taken into account that I won't bore you with, so don't hate on me too much about this. The next thing to be aware of is that mortar doesn't dry, it cures. Once exposed to water, the binder hardens through a process called hydration. Hydration is an exothermic chemical reaction that just means it gives off heat. And the compounds in the cement form chemical bonds with the water molecules and become hydrates. If the water added evaporates or gets pulled from the mortar before this chemical process can occur, the mortar can be compromised. The water can dry out too quickly from heat, but mainly from the bricks sucking the water out of the mortar. Remember that demonstration in the part 1 video where I showed that one of these cedar bayou bricks can absorb 1.5 cups of water? To keep that from happening, the mason always works with wet bricks and continues to wet them down throughout the process to keep water from wicking out of the mortar into the brick and messing up the curing time. The next thing for the mason to constantly check is that each course of brick stays level. That's what these strings are for. The wall must also be plumb or straight up and down. If the wall gets built with a lean, gravity can pull it down over time. Got our new window. Properly supported with lintels, and our garage opening that now has 3 pieces of angled steel instead of 2, the way it should have been. And the bricks are a perfect match. I do think we way overbought on the bricks, but they're hard to come by. I might just keep them in case I do another project. Ricardo got within 1 course of finishing, so poor thing. He's got to come back tomorrow and lay about 20 bricks, but I've got another job he can do inside to make it worth his while to come. And then we'll have to clean up all this mess, and this mess, and that mess, and that mess. A little more plant pulling and repointing went on around the top, and the front ends were repaired to keep them from falling down. The raw brick around the windows was plastered, and I checked the garage off the to-do list as done for now. I'll save cleanup for another day. That's going to be a multi-day ordeal. There is so much to do with this house, and now that the garage is safe, it's on to the next adventure in restoration. If you love seeing old houses brought back to life, subscribe and turn on notifications because there's a lot more to do here at the League-Kempner house in Galveston, Texas, and you don't want to miss the fun. We're just getting started. I hope to see you next time.